Today I'm going to take a bit of a break away from talking about movies and television to talk about the murder of Charlie Kirk. So, first of all, I have to emphasize that I don't condone murder in any way because I think what's the point? Everyone in this world is going to die anyway. So, why rush? I mean, that's a dark joke I also make about suicide because, you never know the day, the hour. Like the Doors said, the future is uncertain and the end is always near, and that's true. So I think to take somebody else's life is stupid, and it's betrayal of it's like the most basic thing you can do is have respect for someone else's life. That being said, I think that Charlie Kirk is becoming a martyr among the American right, and they've fed themselves this narrative that, you know, the left is dangerous, like this radical left, and, you know, they need to be stopped because the BLM riots, burned down, literally burned down cities, although those cities are still there. Um, and, um, and this is not to take sides in the American left or the American right because I'm not American and I would say my political views are much more radical in both ways than I think the American right and the American left are. Like, for example, I think that free trade is something that is 100% shown to increase the global happiness. But I also think, like, free movement of people is also something that increases the global happiness. And I think that freedom of speech and freedom of religion and all of those things also increase the global happiness. But on the other hand, I think that there needs to be some kind of limit to how much property one person can have. And I think that one person should, has a right to property. So when we say, though, that a person has the right to food and water and education and property, I mean that those things should really happen. So everybody should have their own apartment. Everybody should have, like, you know, not guaranteed by the government or anything, but they should take. So there are people who have, 15 rental properties, 500 rental properties. So how is that moral? How is that legal and how is that ethical? So as I said, I would say that I'm much more radical uh, in both directions than the current American right and the current American left are. However, as I said, I think that Charlie Kirk has become this martyr for the conservative movement, and the whole thing is about fear. So they're afraid of the other. They're afraid of different ideas. They're afraid of becoming contaminated. And when they are afraid, when people are afraid, not just one political side or the other, this is the important part. When people are afraid, they lash out at what they consider to be the other, both because they are simultaneously trying to demonstrate how strong they are, and they're also simultaneously horrified on an existential level that the other still exists and poses a threat to them that they are afraid of. Um, there was another video that's making the rounds on social media where a woman was in some kind of class in A&M in Texas, and she objected to gender ideology, right? And she said something like, I'm paraphrasing, but she said something like, you can't be teaching that. According to the president, there are only two genders. This is illegal education. You can't be teaching that. Illegal education? What is that? Illegal education. You have freedom of speech. Everyone should have freedom of speech. Like, that should be an absolute right. Because you need to know that people are idiots, and you need to know that people aren't idiots, you know? So, it, and why I brought that up is because the American right is having these ideological purity tests, and it's affecting the entire world, right? So now I think that the Olympic boxing team in France couldn't compete because they didn't get their gender results back. Like, come on, you're just bashing somebody in the head. Does it matter if it's a woman or a man? Like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So, I feel bad for Charlie Kirk because I think that his opinions were abhorrent, but I think that he was a genuine believer in them. And I think that he was probably a person who could separate different areas of his life. And I think that probably, like a lot of these conservative pundits, he was a performer, and this was a performance that got him killed. Maybe, maybe. But so, because that's the that's the other weird part about this whole thing is like he's murdered, and then people are automatically and kind of in a knee-jerk way framing the narrative like he was killed by some liberal maniac. And I think that benefits the current people who are in charge of the American conservative movement because they can paint the other side as like these wackos, these nut jobs who have all of these guns and we need to take them away and all of that stuff. Um, but I have no evidence for this. This is strictly a matter of opinion. I think that maybe the the shooter was he was motivated by politics for sure, but motivated by the Epstein list because that topic has become bigger and bigger and bigger, and the the problem is that people who are in these like little bubbles, they don't consume any other media. So as far as they're concerned, the idea that Donald Trump was in the Epstein files is like completely new. Whereas if you've been paying attention to Donald Trump, he was in the files from the very beginning. Like him and Epstein were friends. But with this release of this birthday card, it got more and more prominent. And Charlie Kirk was one of the people who was like very loyal to Donald Trump. So Trump kept changing his story, and Kirk kept changing his story as well. So, and a big part of Donald Trump's electoral success was, ironically, that he was saying, the Democrats won't release the Epstein files, and he had all of these people, all of this conservative media saying like the Democrats won't release the Epstein files, spitting this kind of propaganda narrative, right? And it's propaganda because one, Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. And it's also propaganda because you're considering, you're saying like only your enemies have problems. Only they are like the morally abhorrent people. It's not us. We're like morally virtuous, right? And so I imagine, and I don't know if this is true, this is like pure and utter speculation at this point. I imagine that Charlie Kirk could have been assassinated by somebody on the American right who was disappointed with um, his going against his like following the party line about the Epstein files. And it's like really, really odd that they have all of these kind of purity tests, the ideological purity tests, and they talk about virtue signaling among the left, but there's this also weird kind of American rightist virtue signaling that's going on. Like, yeah, of course, it was a leftist wacko job, you know. And I think like a lot of the narrative has been like, oh, the the narrative, the rhetoric on both sides is so extreme, which is a bit much, I would say, because there have been Democratic political people who were targeted for assassinations. Trump had a coup attempt. You know, Trump is like the most corrupt politician in recent memory in the United States. He's like a really bad man, morally, ethically, virtually, whatever. So anything that you say about him, that's not like violent rhetoric unless you say like murder the guy, right? But you know, the guy who did try to murder him was also a conservative, you know, because they have this sort of this trend of having these purity tests. And if once you get into this like ideological movements that have purity tests, it's very, very dangerous because, you know, political violence becomes acceptable. And I want to point out another thing that's important in this whole situation is you have a lot of people calling for like revenge about this Charlie Kirk situation, and that, you know, MAGA is gonna like make sure people are, you know, regret this decision. I mean, obviously these are extremists, right? But once political violence becomes an acceptable form of a tool of communication, then all bets are off for the American project. And people kind of have this mad fantasy of wanting a civil war in America, like that's going to solve anything. But they go back to their old idea of the Civil War, where you have like a clear geographical separation between South and North, and you know the lines are quite clear and the issue is quite clear. But what would you have a civil war about in the United States? Gender ideology? Like, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. And I think that the direction that I fear, and I hope that I'm wrong, but the direction that I fear the American political enterprise is taking is like it would be a multipolar civil war. So you would start like the American right, you know, taking over different cities, and then you'd have a reaction to that, and then you'd have a reaction to that, and then you'd have a reaction to that, and then you'd have a reaction to that. So it wouldn't be like you know, two sides fighting each other. It would be like hundreds of sides fighting each other, you know. And that is not a prospect anybody wants, because the United States is the most powerful country in the world, and what happens there has influence all over the world, you know. So you see the American right are supporting these like people like Orban in Hungary or Bolsonaro in Brazil, you know. So yeah, I it just, as an outside observer of the situation, it just looks like it's getting worse and worse. And people like Charlie Kirk, yeah, I mean, he was a political pundit and he was an extremist, but he was a person and he had a family, and now he's dead at the age of 31. Like, I hadn't even begun to figure out my life at the age of 31. So it's really, really young nowadays to die. And I think, unfortunately, it looks like Charlie Kirk is just the latest and won't be the last in a series of political assassinations in America, which just make the place worse and worse. So, Americans of all political spectrums and size and conflicts do better. You know, the whole world is watching you. We are. We're watching you. Do better. We have really high expectations of you.